Today on the Brad Link, we're talking all about what goes in an invitation. So if you're just getting started wedding planning, this might be some point of confusion for you. Of course you know that you need to include the date and time of the ceremony, but what else needs to go in there? So let's talk about the invitation itself first. This is usually going to be the largest piece of your invitation suite, and you're going to want to include the host of the event. So that might be parents if they're paying for it, or it might be the couple themselves. And next you're going to want to, of course, include the names of the couple, followed by the date and the time of the ceremony, as well as the location of the ceremony. And don't forget to include the address on the invitation. You can write at the bottom something simple like reception to follow, but I've also seen dinner and dancing to follow, or some sort of a description about what they should be planning to eat. So if you're serving something like desserts only, this is a good spot to put like desserts to follow so people can know what to expect. Next, let's talk about your information card, aka your details card, your accommodations card, your directions card, or really anything your guests need to know card. What's going to go on here is any information about wedding attire, the address of your wedding website if you have one, any information about hotel accommodations, shuttle, travel, any directions, or really any other information that you think might be important to your guests about your event. Commonly, you might find a map on the back of this card if it's needed. Another card that's sometimes needed is a reception card. You're only going to need this piece if you're having your ceremony and your reception at two separate locations. You're going to want to include the address of the reception and directions if it's needed. Sometimes if you want to save on your invitation costs and you are using two different locations, you can also put this information on an information card instead if you need to, just so you have less pieces that you have to pay for when you're at print. Another very, very, very important card is your RSVP card. First and foremost, make sure this always is good to include an RSVP by date. Talk to some of your most important vendors like caterers and try to figure out when they need a final head count. Give yourself at least 1 to 2 weeks before that date and make that be your RSVP by date. This will give you a little bit of leeway in case not everybody RSVPs on time, so you can contact the guests individually and see what their response is going to be about attending your event. You're also, if you're going to have any type of meal selections, it's usually going to be on your RSVP card. You can do something simple like list 3 different options and tell them to simply check a box for which one they want. It really is smart on your RSVP card if you choose to include some sort of line where you can be notified of how many guests are actually RSVPing. So for my family, for example, there's myself, my husband, and my daughter. So if we send an RSVP card in, are we saying that my daughter is going to attend or just myself and my husband? Without a separate line, you're not going to know. And that can make a big difference in your final head count and your catering costs. So make sure to include that. Commonly, you're also going to want to have some sort of identifier so you know who is RSVPing. Trust me, if you forget this on your RSVP card, it is a grave, grave, grave mistake. So oftentimes you'll see a line for them to put their name in. Sometimes the line might have an M at the beginning of it. So it could be Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Ruggieri attending. This will let you know who the response is coming from. And a little secret is if you want to get some ghost ink or invisible ink, it actually lights up to UV light. You can put a little number on the back of your RSVP card in invisible ink. So if somebody forgets to write their name in, you can identify them based on the number that you put on the back. So that means you have to have a little bit of forethought and actually number your guest list. And when you're sending out your invitations, the corresponding number on the back of the RSVP card has to go in the correct envelope to the correct guest. I know this sounds like a lot of work, but if some of your guests forget to put their name on their RSVP card, you'll be very happy that you did this. Next, let's talk all about your envelopes. You're actually going to need 2 to 3 envelopes for each invitation suite. One is going to be your response envelope. This is the one that is going to accept the RSVP card, and it's usually a lot smaller than the other two. For formal invitations, you're going to have inner envelopes as well as outer envelopes. The outer envelopes are going to be the most formal. So on the outside, it's going to have your return address on the back flap of the envelope, as well as the guest address on the front. And since we're being super fancy and formal, the guest name should be written out with their full name, and you wouldn't abbreviate any cities or any states when you're writing out the address. On the inner envelope, you can be a little bit less formal, and you can do things like include Jane and John instead of their full names. This is a good opportunity if you're not going to be inviting any children as part of your wedding guest list to only list the adults' names on the inner envelope. That's a signal that the kids aren't invited. If your name's not on the inner envelope, you didn't get invited. Now for the response envelope, when they're going to send in their RSVPs, those of course are going to be addressed back to you. And the most polite thing to do is to pre-stamp your RSVP envelopes so that way it's easy for them to respond back to you and it's at no cost to your guest. Specifically, when we're talking about postage, the best thing to do is to take your first completed invitation suite to the post office and have the person behind the counter weigh it for you. This way, they can tell you the exact amount of postage that you're going to want to include on the outer envelope, as well as really the RSVP envelope, to make sure that those packages get to the correct person. If you underestimate your postage, I hate to tell you, but none of your invitations are going to get to your guests. They're actually going to be returned to sender back to you, and then you're going to have to pay the correct amount of postage all over again and remail them. Some of your different types of invitation suites that might be a little bit more complicated might actually need to be hand sorted through the post office instead of going through the machines that they have. If you find that your invitation suite needs to be hand sorted, it's best to know this in the beginning by taking your original and first invitation suite to be weighed, but you're going to want to bring in all the invitations at once in a box to the post office. Let them know that it has to be hand sorted when you hand it over to them through the counter. So if you have any more questions about invitations, we would love to know what they are so we can answer them. But for more expert wedding planning advice, just follow us at thebradlink.com.